The city below glowed like a sea of gold beneath the midnight sky. From the top floor of a glass tower, Alexander Drake stared through the enormous window of his office. A man who had everything the world could offer, and yet nothing that made his heart beat for more than a moment. At only 31, he was already one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His name appeared in magazines, his parties filled social media, and his arrogance was legendary. People either feared him or envied him. No one truly knew him. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the city and the sound of ice melting in his half-empty glass of whiskey. The floor-to-ceiling shelves were filled with awards, photos of business triumphs, and framed newspaper headlines praising his genius. But tonight, all of it felt meaningless. He slouched back in his leather chair, tie loosened, the bitter smell of alcohol hanging in the air. His once sharp blue eyes were glassy, empty. He drank not to celebrate but to forget, though even he no longer knew what he was trying to forget. Then a sound broke the silence, the faint click of a door opening. He frowned. At this hour no one dared to disturb him. "Mr. Drake," a soft voice said. He turned his head lazily, expecting one of his secretaries who had somehow gathered the courage to interrupt him. But it wasn't one of them. At the doorway stood a woman, young, slender, her dark hair tied back neatly, wearing a simple gray uniform and holding a mop. Her skin was a deep bronze, glowing under the cold fluorescent lights, and her eyes, large, brown, and alive, seemed out of place in that lifeless office. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. "I was told to clean this floor tonight." Alexander squinted at her, confused for a moment, then irritated. "Do it later," he muttered, his voice rough from drink. "I'm still here." She hesitated. "They told me it must be done before morning." He set his glass down sharply on the desk. The sound echoed. "I said later," he repeated, more forcefully this time. She looked at him, her expression calm but unwavering. "It won't take long," she said quietly. "You don't even have to move." Something about her composure, her lack of fear, annoyed him. No one ever talked to him that way. Not assistants, not investors, not even his board of directors. He leaned back, smirking bitterly. "Do you even know who I am?" She didn't look impressed. "Yes," she said simply, kneeling down to pick up a piece of paper from the floor. "You're the man everyone in this building avoids." For a moment he said nothing. Her words hit him like a slap. But before he could react, she continued sweeping, calm and graceful, as if she hadn't just insulted one of the most powerful men in the city. "Stop!" he snapped. She froze, her back still turned. "I told you to get out," he said, standing up abruptly, his voice echoing across the glass and marble. Still, she didn't move. Slowly, she bent down again to clean under the table. Her hair fell forward, a dark waterfall against her cheek. That was when something inside him shifted. He walked around the desk, anger boiling in his chest, and grabbed her arm to pull her up. But the moment their eyes met, the world stopped. Her gaze struck him like lightning, not fearful, not submissive, but deep, magnetic, alive. For the first time in years, Alexander Drake felt something real. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The whiskey, the arrogance, the coldness, all of it evaporated under that look. She stood still, her lips parted slightly, her breath quick and shallow. Neither of them moved. The air between them felt electric, fragile, dangerous. "I said," he began, his voice suddenly softer, uncertain, "you should go." But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "Why are you so angry, Mr. Drake?" No one had ever asked him that before. Not once in his entire life. He stared at her, this woman who should have been invisible in his world. And for the first time, he felt seen. It was absurd, impossible. Yet in that instant, something inside him cracked. The man who thought he could buy everything suddenly realized he'd never truly owned anything at all. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He had returned home to his penthouse, a vast expanse of glass and silence that overlooked the city like a throne suspended in the clouds. Every object inside was perfect. Imported marble floors, priceless art, sleek furniture designed by names the world admired, yet none of it felt alive. He poured himself another drink, but the whiskey burned differently this time, not soothing, just hollow. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again, the soft bronze glow of her skin, the calm fire in her eyes, the way she looked at him as if she saw through the layers of arrogance and loneliness he had spent years building. "Why are you so angry, Mr. Drake?" The words echoed in his head like a whisper he couldn't escape. He had been called many things in his life: brilliant, ruthless, charming, heartless, but never angry. And yet somehow she had seen it, not the anger of power, but the deeper kind, the fury born from emptiness. He sat down at the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection in the dark window. For the first time, he hated the man staring back. The following morning, when he entered his office, the world around him resumed its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, assistants hurrying, the sound of polished shoes echoing across marble floors. Everything looked the same, but he wasn't. He told himself that the night before had meant nothing, just a random encounter, just a maid doing her job. And yet, when he passed the cleaning cart in the hallway, his heart betrayed him. It skipped. He forced himself to look away, walking faster, pretending not to notice the scent of lavender that lingered faintly in the air. By noon, he had buried himself in work, meetings, numbers, deals, his armor. But no matter how many signatures he placed or how many contracts he reviewed, her image followed him like a shadow behind every polished surface. It was absurd. He was Alexander Drake, the man who could have any woman he wanted. Actresses, models, heiresses, all had been within reach, and none had stayed long enough to matter. So why couldn't he stop thinking about her? A cleaning woman whose name he didn't even know. The second encounter. 3 days later, it happened again. It was late, nearly midnight, and everyone had gone home. He stayed behind, pretending to work, though his thoughts were miles away. The building was silent except for the low hum of the city far below. Then came that sound again, the soft creak of the door, the faint rhythm of footsteps on the polished floor. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He already knew who it was. "Good evening, Mr. Drake," she said politely, her voice calm, like music that didn't belong to this cold place. He looked up slowly. Her hair was tied, differently this time, a loose strand falling near her cheek. The light from the desk lamp caught in her eyes, turning them into something between gold and chestnut. "You're late," he said, though he wasn't sure why. "I start when everyone leaves," she replied softly. "It's quieter then." He watched her as she began to clean, precise, graceful, unhurried. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if she was not cleaning but performing a quiet ritual that purified everything she touched. After a long silence, he spoke again. "What's your name?" She looked at him for a moment, surprised that he cared enough to ask. "Isabella," she said. He repeated it under his breath. "Isabella." It lingered on his tongue like a secret he wasn't supposed to know. The unraveling. Over the next few weeks, Alexander found excuses to stay late. He told himself it was business, but the truth was far more dangerous. Every night when the city began to sleep, he waited for the sound of that door, for her quiet presence, for the strange peace that filled the room when she was near. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. She worked. He watched, pretending to read reports he never understood. Other times, their conversations drifted into places he had never shared with anyone. She talked about simple things, her younger brother, her dream of studying art, the way she loved the smell of rain. And he, without realizing, began to open pieces of himself he had kept locked away for years. He told her about his father, a man who had built empires but never learned to say, "I'm proud of you." He told her about his mother who died when he was a child, leaving behind a silence he had tried to fill with noise and money. She listened. She never judged. She never flattered. She simply saw him, and that terrified him more than anything else. The shift one night, as she finished cleaning, she dropped a small crystal ornament from the shelf. It shattered. She gasped, kneeling quickly to pick up the pieces. "I'm so sorry." He stepped closer and stopped her hand. "It's fine," he said quietly. Their fingers brushed, and time froze again. He could smell the faint hint of jasmine from her hair, feel the warmth of her skin against his. It was such a small thing, yet it sent a tremor through him. When she looked up, their faces were inches apart. Something raw and unspoken passed between them. Fear, desire, confusion, all tangled in a single heartbeat. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. Instead, she slowly stood up, her eyes locked with his. Then she said softly, "Good night, Mr. Drake," and left, leaving him there, surrounded by glass, silence, and a heart he no longer recognized as his own. That night, Alexander didn't sleep again. He realized something he had never thought possible. For the first time in his life, He wanted someone not because he could have her, but because he couldn't. The empire he had built suddenly felt fragile. The throne of arrogance he had sat upon began to crumble beneath the weight of a single woman's gaze. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Days passed, yet Alexander could not shake her from his mind. Every corner of his office, every shadow along the polished marble floor seemed to echo her presence. He tried to bury himself in work, acquisitions, meetings, contracts, but the numbers and deals blurred together, irrelevant, meaningless. Nothing had ever felt this urgent before. Isabella, the name, alone had begun to haunt him. It was no longer a sound, but a feeling, a pulse that thudded through his veins in quiet, impossible moments. He remembered the way her eyes held him the first night, unwavering, almost daring him to see himself for what he was. That look had shattered the invisible walls he had spent decades erecting, and for the first time, he was unarmed. Unforgettable. It was early evening when he returned to the office again, ostensibly to finish some urgent paperwork. The office was bathed in the warm orange glow of the setting sun, light spilling across the cityscape, glinting off the glass and steel like molten gold. She was already there, sweeping near his desk, humming softly, a sound so delicate it seemed almost forbidden in a space like his. He froze for a moment, just watching her. The sunlight kissed her skin, highlighting the subtle curve of her neck, the way her hair fell naturally across her shoulders. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She simply existed, and it was enough to make him feel alive in ways money never had. "Mr. Drake?" she asked, her voice breaking the spell slightly. "Do you need me to move the chair?" He shook his head, his throat suddenly tight. "No, it's fine," he muttered, his words rough, betraying a tension he could not hide. She glanced at him briefly, and in that fleeting second, the spark returned, a jolt neither of them could name. The battle inside Alexander paced the room after she started cleaning. Again, anger, desire, fear, and curiosity churned inside him like a storm. He had been powerful all his life, accustomed to getting what he wanted with a glance, a word, or a gesture. Yet she was immune to all of it. She saw him clearly, without flattery, without fear, without submission, and that frightened him more than anything else. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered to himself, pacing the floor. He had tried to ignore her, to avoid this, but it was impossible. She had entered his life like a sudden wind, tearing away the cold certainty he had clung to for years. He hated it, and yet he craved it. A moment too close. She bent down to pick up a fallen piece of paper near his desk. He stepped forward, almost unconsciously, and instinctively, their hands brushed again. This time, he didn't pull away. The warmth of her skin, the faint scent of jasmine in her hair, sent a shock through him, a shocking, overwhelming reminder that he was no longer in control. Their eyes met. The air around them thickened. The office, once a place of cold authority and dominance, seemed suddenly intimate, electric, alive. "Mr. Drake," she whispered softly, barely audible. His hand twitched, as if drawn to hers, yet his pride, his arrogance, screamed at him to stop. He was a man used to conquering, used to possessing, but she could not be conquered, and that made him want her more. The first confession. That night, Alexander stayed longer than usual. The city below glimmered like a carpet of stars, but his mind was elsewhere, with her, in that simple gray uniform, bending, moving, alive. He knew he shouldn't feel this way. He had never felt this way. Women had been companions, distractions, trophies, never something that consumed him from the inside out. And yet, he felt something he had never known. Vulnerability. "Alexander." Her voice startled him. He hadn't realized she had turned. She was standing just a few feet away, holding a small dustpan. He laughed, bitter and low. "Why do you insist on staying here? I told you to leave." She didn't move. She looked at him steadily, unflinching. "Because some things cannot wait," she said softly. Those words hit him harder than any slap, any insult. Her calm strength, her unwavering presence, made him aware of every flaw, every fracture in himself, and yet it made him ache. He stepped closer, feeling the tension crackle between them. His fingers twitched as if they longed to reach out and touch her, but his pride restrained him. I don't know what I feel," he admitted almost to himself. You." She tilted her head slightly. the corner of her lips curving into the faintest smile. "You don't have to understand," she whispered. "Just feel." The tension ignites. It was that moment, the first time that something changed. A spark ignited between them, silent but scorching. A force neither could deny. Passion, attraction, fascination, all intertwined, overwhelming, uncontrollable. Alexander, the man who had been untouchable, found himself on the brink of surrender. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to claim her, yet he was terrified of what that would mean. Because this wasn't just desire. This was a revolution of the heart, a force that could undo him entirely. She, on the other hand, seemed equally aware, equally hesitant, equally drawn. Her eyes held secrets, pain, humor, and a vulnerability that demanded care, attention, and respect. And he realized, as he had never realized before, that she was everything he didn't know he was missing. The breaking point. By the time she finally moved to leave, Alexander's restraint had begun to crack. "Wait," he said, his voice rougher than intended. She paused, looking back at him, her expression unreadable. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to claim some understanding, but all he could do was step closer. "Stay," he whispered. "Just stay." Her breath caught, her lips parted, and for the first time, they were alone. Not boss and employee, not rich and poor, not arrogant and humble. Just two people staring across the invisible line that separated them, a line that was dissolving with every heartbeat. And in that silence, in that perfect, terrifying moment, passion ignited, consuming everything in its path. Alexander Drake, the untouchable, the arrogant, the cold, felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. He was falling, hard, completely, irrevocably. The days that followed were unlike anything Alexander had ever experienced. He moved through his penthouse and office as if in a dream. Every object, every surface, every corner seemed to carry a memory of her presence. He found himself searching for her in the quiet moments, in the shadows of the evening, in the glint of sunlight on the glass floors, in the echo of the city far below. Isabella had entered his life like a whisper, subtle, yet impossible to ignore. She was not just a cleaning woman. She had become a force that pulled at him, demanding attention, respect, even admiration. And Alexander Drake, who had never known patience, humility, or vulnerability, was powerless. The first evening together, it was an unusually quiet night. The office was empty, the city lights stretched endlessly below, glittering like stars on earth. Isabella was finishing her work, moving with her usual grace, when Alexander stepped forward. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly, though his voice betrayed a tension he could barely contain. She paused and looked at him, her eyes reflecting the golden city lights. "I want to stay," she said softly. He felt a shiver run down his spine. The simplicity of her words, the honesty in her gaze, struck him deeper than any challenge, any business negotiation, any woman he had ever encountered. "Why?" he asked, almost too softly to hear himself. "Because you look like you need someone to remind you you're human," she whispered. Something inside him cracked at those words. He was used to power, control, perfection. But she had seen him for what he was, stripped bare, and she had offered no judgment, no fear, only presence. He stepped closer, and the air between them thickened. He wanted to touch her, to feel her warmth, yet he held back, terrified of crossing the line between obsession and desire. A confession in the dark. That night, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about her. Every thought, every plan, every ambition was eclipsed by the memory of her eyes, her voice, her quiet strength. He remembered the first time he had touched her hand, accidental yet electric, and the way her warmth had spread through him, igniting something that had lain dormant for years. By the time he returned to his penthouse, the city stretched out below him like a sea of lights, and he realized he had never felt loneliness so profoundly. He poured himself another drink, intending to drown it all. But the whiskey no longer numbed him. Instead, it sharpened every thought, every emotion. "I'm falling," he muttered under his breath, a confession he hadn't allowed himself to speak aloud before. And for the first time in his life, the words felt terrifyingly true. The meeting that changed everything. 2 nights later, Alexander found himself at the office much later than usual. The cleaning staff had mostly left, but Isabella remained. finishing the floor near the windows. He walked up silently, watching her move. Her back was straight, her movements fluid, her hair loose and glowing under the light. The mundane act of cleaning had never looked so beautiful. "Do you ever rest?" he asked suddenly. She paused, looking at him over her shoulder. "Rest comes when the day ends," she replied simply. "But work keeps the mind alive." He felt something inside twist at her words. Admiration, frustration, longing, all tangled together. He wanted to say something more, to confess that his life had changed in ways he could not name since she had entered it. Instead, he said the first thing that came to mind. "Do you believe in fate?" She tilted her head, considering. "I believe in moments that change everything," she said quietly. "Some people never notice them. Others are transformed." Alexander felt a jolt through him. She was speaking directly to him, to the man who had spent his life blind to the things that mattered. The first moment of passion. The tension between them had become unbearable. Every glance, every shared silence, every brush of hands was electric, and yet neither had fully crossed the line. That night, Alexander stayed behind longer than usual. The office lights had dimmed, the city below hushed, and he finally allowed himself to step into the space she occupied. "Alexander," she breathed, sensing the storm in him. I can't stay away," he admitted, his voice rough, strained with desire. "I've tried. I can't." She turned to face him fully, her eyes wide, vulnerable, yet fearless. He reached for her, and this time, she didn't pull away. Their lips met, tentative at first, then urgent. Every kiss, every touch, every heartbeat was charged with a longing that neither had ever known. Alexander's world shifted. All the money, all the power, all the accolades, they faded into insignificance. The only reality that mattered was her, and she responded in kind, not with hesitation, but with the same consuming passion, the same fire that had ignited in him from the very first moment they had locked eyes. It was more than desire. It was revolution, surrender, and awakening all at once. Hints of mystery, yet beneath the fire a shadow lingered. Alexander sensed it in her pauses, the fleeting looks toward the window, the moments when her gaze darkened. "Isabella?" he asked softly as they held each other, breathless. "Who are you really?" She looked away, a flicker of something unspoken crossing her features. I have a past," she admitted. "A life you don't know, a life I can't share yet." He felt a twinge, of fear, not of losing her, but of the unknown that could destroy the fragile world they were beginning to build together. But even that fear couldn't stop him. He pressed a kiss to her temple, holding her tight. "I don't care," he whispered. "Whatever it is, I'll face it, with you." She rested her head against his chest, and for a long moment, the storm outside and inside ceased. And in that silence, Alexander realized something he had never allowed himself to hope. He was not alone anymore. The reckoning approaches, but fate had already begun moving. Shadows from Isabella's past, hidden and dangerous, were stirring. Alexander's world of wealth, power, and control, the world he thought was unshakable, was about to collide with the truth she had kept hidden. And when that collision came, nothing would be the same. Not their passion, not their hearts, not their lives. Because love, this consuming, the kind that burns hotter than pride or fear, is always tested, and the storm that had begun between Alexander and Isabella was only the first of many trials. The city lights shimmered below like a tapestry of endless gold and silver, but Alexander Drake barely noticed them. He sat in his office, head in his hands, the emptiness he thought he had conquered now crashing over him like a tidal wave. Isabella's words from the night before echoed relentlessly in his mind. "I have a past, a life you don't know, a life I can't share yet." He had tried to ignore it, tried to focus on work, on the contracts, on the empire he had built. But he couldn't, not when every fiber of his being was bound to her. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a force, an obsession, a reality that demanded confrontation, the unexpected arrival. The next evening, Alexander waited, not in the penthouse, not at home, but at the office. The building was quiet, eerily so, with the faint hum of air conditioning the only background noise. He didn't know why he was waiting. Part of him feared what would happen when she came. Part of him craved it. Then, the familiar sound of the door opening. "Good evening, Mr. Drake," Isabella said softly. her voice trembling just enough to make him aware of her vulnerability. He stood, moving toward her instinctively. "Isabella, I need to know. Please, I need the truth." Her eyes flickered with fear. She looked down, and for the first time, Alexander saw her falter. I wasn't always this," she whispered. "I had a life, a family I left behind. Things I can't undo. Choices I regret every day." He felt his chest tighten. Her words were full of pain, full of history he could not yet grasp. "Tell me," he said, stepping closer, his hand reaching for hers. "I can handle it. Whatever it is, we'll face it. Together." The confession. She took a deep breath, gathering courage she hadn't known she had. "I grew up in a small town, far from the luxury and wealth you live in," she began. "My parents, they were not kind. Life was hard. Every day was a struggle, and I learned early that I had to fight for everything I wanted. I ran away to the city. I worked jobs that no one would ever think of, cleaning offices, waitressing, anything just to survive. And then I met someone who hurt me deeply, and I swore I would never let anyone get close again." Her voice quivered, but she continued. "When I met you, I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to feel safe, to feel alive." Alexander's heart ached. Here was a woman who had faced more darkness than he could imagine, yet she had courage, more courage than anyone he had ever known. "You've been running from your past," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But you don't have to anymore, not with me." Her eyes met his, wide, searching, hesitant, yet filled with a longing that mirrored his own. The breaking of barriers. That night, their connection deepened. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word between them was electric, consuming, irreversibly, binding them together. Alexander's usual control, his arrogance, even his carefully constructed emotional armor, crumbled completely in the face of Isabella's raw, unguarded humanity. He realized, with a clarity that both terrified and exhilarated him, that he had never truly known love before. All his past encounters had been shallow, transactional, devoid of the depth and vulnerability Isabella demanded and gave. They spent hours talking, sharing secrets, fears, and small joys they had never voiced aloud. And in that space, Alexander understood. The woman before him was not just his desire. She was his salvation, his reckoning, and his greatest challenge all at once. And the first threat. But love, as Alexander had learned through his life of power and wealth, never comes without danger. The next morning, a message arrived, not on his phone, not in an email, but slipped under his office door. A single photograph. It was Isabella, from years ago, standing beside a man whose face he did not recognize. But the look in her eyes, the fear, the tension, the almost desperate secrecy, it was unmistakable. Alexander stared at it, his pulse racing. Questions, doubts, and a sudden storm of jealousy and fear consumed him. "What is this?" he muttered to himself. "What are you hiding from me?" He had pledged himself to her, yet now he realized he knew almost nothing. Her past, the life she had kept buried, threatened to unravel everything he had just discovered about himself. Love, vulnerability, and the possibility of a life beyond power and wealth. The confrontation. That evening, when Isabella arrived, Alexander could barely contain himself. "Why?" he demanded, voice shaking with both anger and desperation. "Why didn't you tell me about him? About your past?" She looked at him, pain flickering across her features. "I told you everything I could, Alexander. I wanted to tell you more. But some things take time. Some truths aren't safe until the right moment." He felt frustration, love, desire, and fear collide within him. "I need honesty, Isabella. If we're going to have anything, you cannot hide from me. Not ever." Her lips trembled. "I know," she said softly, "and I will tell you everything. But you have to promise me. You have to promise me you'll stay, even when the truth hurts." He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "I promise," he said, voice low, unwavering. "Even if the world falls apart around us, I promise I will stay." The beginning of transformation. And in that moment, Alexander Drake felt something he had never felt before. Trust without condition. For the first time in his life, he realized that real strength was not in wealth, in power, or in control. It was in opening his heart, risking everything for love, and letting another person see him fully. Isabella, in turn, allowed herself to let down her walls. to finally feel safe in a world she had spent so long fearing. Together, they had ignited something greater than passion, a bond built on honesty, vulnerability, and the promise of shared strength, a bond that would be tested by the secrets that lurked in the shadows of her past and by the power and influence of his world. And Alexander understood that life, love, and destiny had only just begun. The city below glimmered with a deceptive serenity, but Alexander Drake's world was unraveling at a speed he had never known. The photograph he had received, Isabella's hidden past, and the sudden surge of feelings he couldn't control were all colliding inside him, leaving chaos in their wake. He sat in his office late at night, staring at the image again, Isabella, smiling faintly, yet standing beside a man whose presence seemed threatening, whose connection to her was unknown, mysterious, and dangerous. His pulse raced. Every instinct he had, every lesson he had learned from power and control, screamed that something was wrong. But beneath the fear, a new truth burned brighter than doubt. He couldn't imagine life without her. Every fiber of his being pulled toward her, even through the storm of uncertainty. The first threat emerges. The next day, subtle signs began to appear. A luxury car followed Isabella near her apartment. Phone calls with no voice, just static. A figure in the shadows that seemed to vanish whenever she looked. Alexander noticed immediately. He had long been a man accustomed to control, to domination, to solving problems with money, influence, and strategy. But this was personal, intangible, and terrifying. "Who is watching you?" he demanded one evening as Isabella arrived at his office. Her eyes were wide, alert, tense, a stark contrast to her usual calm. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I've felt it for days. I thought it was just my imagination." Alexander took her hand, gripping it tightly. "Nothing is imaginary. Nothing will touch you. Not while I'm here." She looked at him, vulnerability and gratitude warring in her gaze. And in that moment, he realized that his life had changed completely. Protecting her was no longer optional. It was essential. The internal struggle. But the external threats were not the only storms Alexander faced. Inside, he wrestled with a new kind of powerlessness, the vulnerability of love. He had always been untouchable, feared, admired, desired. Yet Isabella, with her strength and humility, had stripped him bare. He spent long nights pacing the penthouse, replaying every moment with her. The first spark in the office, the quiet intensity of her gaze, the softness of her lips against his. Every detail burned into him, making him ache with longing and frustration. And every time he thought about the photograph, about the man in her past, a cold pang of jealousy and fear struck him. He wanted to confront it, control it, but he knew. This time he couldn't buy a solution, couldn't negotiate power, couldn't force fate. He was learning that love was not a game of power, and that terrified him, more than any boardroom or business battle ever could. The confrontation in the office. That night, Alexander insisted she stay late. The office was dimly lit. The city outside, like a blanket of lights, stretched to infinity. "Tell me everything," he demanded, voice low and tense. "Every detail, every secret. I need to know." Isabella hesitated. Fear flickered across her face, but she knew he meant it. She had trusted him before, but this was deeper, riskier. His name was Raphael, she admitted finally. "He was someone I loved once, someone who promised safety but brought only pain. He threatened me, controlled me. I had to leave him to survive. I didn't think I'd ever see him again." Alexander's jaw tightened. Anger, protective instinct, and desire collided. He wanted to hunt Raphael down, to crush him, to erase every memory of him from her life. Yet he also knew that Isabella had survived because of her own strength, not anyone else's. "You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And you'll never face him alone again. Not while I'm here." The night of the storm. Hours later, the storm arrived, both outside and inside their lives. Rain pounded the glass walls of the office, lightning illuminating the city in jagged streaks. Shadows moved unnervingly in the streets below, and Isabella's phone rang incessantly, calls from unknown numbers that brought tension to every moment. Alexander held her close, feeling the power of the storm reflect the chaos in their hearts. Every lightning strike seemed to echo the electricity between them, Every gust of wind mirrored the intensity of their passion and fear, and in the midst of it, they kissed. Long, desperate, urgent, not out of lust alone, but out of a need to anchor themselves against the chaos surrounding them. For a moment, it was only them. The storm outside, the danger looming, the past threatening. Nothing mattered but the fire that had ignited between their hearts. The first major turning point. By dawn, the storm had passed. The city was drenched, streets shimmering under the pale light of morning, but the tension remained. Raphael's presence, Isabella's past, and the new intensity of their connection meant that nothing would be simple. Alexander had realized something profound. This woman, humble yet unbreakable, had changed him utterly. His empire, his wealth, his control, all were meaningless compared to her. And yet, the danger of the past and the storm outside meant that love alone would not be enough. They would have to fight, to trust, to endure. And Alexander, for the first time in his life, welcomed the challenge, not because he was unafraid, but because for the first time, he had something worth fighting for, something he could not afford to lose. He looked at Isabella, asleep against his chest, exhausted from fear and tension, and whispered softly, "Whatever comes, whatever tries to tear us apart, I'll protect you. I promise, always." And in that promise, the seeds of destiny were sown, a destiny neither could fully see, but one that would push them to the limits of love, courage, and trust in the ultimate battle for their hearts. The city slept beneath a blanket of darkness, yet Alexander Drake's world had never felt more awake. Every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of light through the penthouse windows reminded him that tonight would change everything. Isabella sat across from him. In the dimly lit office, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. The storm of the past weeks had tested them beyond endurance. Danger, passion, fear, and desire had collided in ways neither could have anticipated. And now, the final truth waited, heavy and unyielding. The revelation of the past. Alexander took her hand gently, feeling the tremble in her fingers. "You don't have to hide anything from me," he whispered. "Not anymore. Whatever your past, whatever you've endured, I'll face it with you." Isabella swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "Alexander, Raphael is more dangerous than I ever imagined. I thought leaving him behind would end it all. But he's returned, and he's more powerful, more ruthless. He wants me back, or worse, to ruin everything we've built." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then we face him together. You, me, no one else." Her gaze searched his, a mix of relief, fear, and overwhelming love. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in someone completely, in him. The night of confrontation. The city was alive with tension as they prepared. Raphael had come with influence, wealth, and a cruel cunning, but he had underestimated two things: Alexander's unwavering determination and Isabella's strength, forged through years of survival. They waited in the office, lights dimmed, every shadow seeming like a potential threat. Alexander stood behind Isabella, protective, yet respecting her space, knowing that this battle was theirs. Together, not his alone to fight. When Raphael finally arrived, he exuded arrogance and menace, but neither Alexander nor Isabella flinched. Their unity, forged in fire and desire, made them unshakable. "You shouldn't have run, Isabella," Raphael hissed, his eyes dark, scanning Alexander with thinly veiled contempt. "I ran to live," she replied calmly, her voice steady despite the tension. "And I chose my life, my freedom, and the man I love. You will not take that from me." Alexander stepped forward, voice low, unwavering. "You're done controlling her. You have no power here, and if you try, you'll regret it." Raphael's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected such defiance. He hadn't expected Alexander to care, to truly care. The emotional climax. As the confrontation escalated, the tension between Alexander and Isabella ignited into a storm of passion and emotion. The danger, the fear, the adrenaline of defiance, all of it intertwined with their love, binding them together stronger than ever. Alexander grabbed Isabella's hand, holding her close. "I've spent my life controlling everything," he whispered. "But with you, I've learned I can't control love. I can only feel it. I only want to feel it with you." Isabella's eyes shimmered with tears of relief, desire, and trust. "And I only want to feel it with you, Alexander," she whispered back. The intensity of the moment was almost unbearable. The threat of Raphael, the weight of the past, and the undeniable truth of their hearts, colliding in a singular, overwhelming force. Raphael, realizing his power was crumbling, backed away, defeated not by violence, but by the unwavering unity and love of the two people he thought he could manipulate. The victory of love. The dawn broke over the city as Alexander and Isabella stood together, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the penthouse windows. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within their hearts, and now, finally, there was calm. Alexander held Isabella close, inhaling her scent, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Every fear, every doubt, every battle had led to this, the realization that love was the most powerful force of all. "I promise you, Isabella," he said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "No storm, no past, no power in the world can ever come between us. I am yours, completely, forever." She smiled, her heart full, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I am yours, Alexander, always." They embraced, their lips meeting in a kiss that was no longer tentative or uncertain, but fierce, passionate, and full of the promise of the future, the transformation. Alexander Drake, once untouchable, arrogant, and cold, had been reborn. He had discovered the meaning of vulnerability, trust, and unconditional love. Isabella, once burdened by fear and the shadows of her past, had found strength, protection, and the freedom to love fully. Together they were unstoppable, a force forged by passion, tested by danger, and bound by the deepest connection of all, the unwavering certainty that they had found their soul in one another. The city below sparkled like stars, unaware of the storm that had passed above, unaware that two hearts had emerged from the chaos forever intertwined, stronger and brighter than ever. And in that moment, Alexander and Isabella realized something extraordinary. Their love was not only their salvation, but their greatest triumph. No past, no threat, no obstacle could ever undo what had been forged. In fire, passion, and unwavering devotion. The ending. As the first light of morning spilled across the skyline, Alexander held Isabella's face gently in his hands. "We survived everything," he whispered. "And now, we begin." She leaned into him, her lips brushing his, and smiled. Together. The empire, the danger, the past, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the love they had found, the storm they had weathered, and the infinite future they would share. And as they stood, together hand in hand, gazing out over the city, the world seemed to bow to the power of what they had discovered. True love is unstoppable, unbreakable, and eternal. This concludes the epic 7-part story of Alexander and Isabella, a journey of arrogance, passion, danger, and ultimate transformation through love.